It's been more than a year since my last tier list, and now we have 4 new killers, a bunch of reworks, and a complete meta change. This is my ranking, so let's not waste any more time, starting with the killers that need a rework or a lot of buffs to be viable. And let's start with the newest member in this category, and that is the School Merchant. If I made this video some months ago, she would have been a B tier character at best. But after the 8 massive nerfs she has received, I simply find no reason to play her unless you really like her character. And this was intentional, as the devs wanted to tone her kill rate down. With only one scan line per drone that is visible at all times, her trap setup playstyle is completely gone unless the survivors play with the monitors turned off, by which point you would win with any other character choice. The new slowdown every time you place a drone or pull up the scanner up counters the haste she gets when scanning a survivor, making her clunky to use, and the fact that survivors can just crouch or fast vault in order to ignore the scan lines, meanwhile the rest of the team disables your drones without any repercussions, makes her a complete joke of a character. She is just an M1 killer, with her best quality being that you get 8 seconds of undetectable every time you place a new drone, which can be useful against survivors that just started playing DBD. Her add-on selection is also decent, but it's the equivalent of putting Febreze on a dumpster. While it might smell better, underneath that fake aroma is still the lingering stench of trash. If you are playing against a group of survivors that takes this game seriously, you will get more value playing literally any other character. And even if you want to argue that Schoolie is not that bad and I am just exaggerating, she will get a complete rework in 2025, so you are basically wasting your time improving skills on a character that might not exist anymore. Another character set to get a rework in the future is Freddy Krueger, also known as the Nightmare, because that's what the match is going to feel like if you play against decent survivors. Freddy's power has so many holes in it, it puts Swiss cheese to shame. The first main issue is that he begins the match powerless, as you have to wait 45 seconds for his teleport to work, which is the longest cooldown out of all teleporting killers in DBD, and also 1 entire minute for survivors to fall asleep passively unless you use an iridescent add-on. And once they are asleep, what do you get? Well, it's between two choices. On one hand, you have the most mediocre anti-loop power in the entire game. 6 snares that you can place around the map, which are too weak to be used as traps, easy to avoid so they can't be used for tracking, and are basically a worse version of the clown's bottles. And the worst part is that when I made my ranking video 1 year ago, he was not the worst killer in DBD, and that was because Freddy could place snares through walls, which made them much better to use and more fluid overall. Well, according to the developers, that was a bug which has been fixed. Now on the other hand, and only accessible through the use of specific add-ons, we have Dream Pallets, which can be fun against clueless survivors, but they are completely useless against a coordinated team. And the worst part is that once your trick has been shown, you cannot rely on Dream Snares as you are stuck with the pallets for that match. Let me also remind you that these two powers only work on survivors that are asleep. If a survivor decides to interact with the Dream World clocks in order to wake up, they have a 30-second sleep prevention grace period where even if you hit them, they won't start falling asleep until 1 minute passes. So you could be having an entire chase with a survivor where your power directly doesn't work. By far the best part of Freddy, and the only reason some players don't think he is trash, is his Dream Projection, the ability to teleport to generators, which can be decent as it synergizes really well with a lot of strong perks like Barbecue, Pop Goes the Weasel, and the new buffed Deadman Switch, which is low-key insane on him. You can also fake the teleport in order to confuse the survivors and gain a bit of time. So what is the catch? I already mentioned the grueling 45 seconds cooldown to his power, but did I mention the fact that you cannot teleport to repaired or blocked generators, which makes you lose an entire part of his power in the endgame. Did I also mention how there is a global sound that every survivor hears whenever you teleport, so you cannot use it as a chase tool against good survivors and everyone knows when you are teleporting? Another fact that puts him under the other D-tier characters is his very poor add-on arsenal. One of his iridescent add-ons is a mini Blood Warden, the other just lets him use his power more consistently. In my opinion, the best add-ons are the Killer Instinct ones whenever you teleport to a generator, which is something other killers get base kit, so not even with add-ons can you make Freddy work. So, the only thing you have going on with Freddy is hope that the rework in January will finally make him worth playing. Since my last ranking video, the Trapper has received 2 buffs which are pretty welcome and make him better to play. The first buff was that the traps spawn near generators, which fixed the problem he had where sometimes traps were just too far away to waste time and pick up, like in the corners of the swamp. The second buff was a speed boost anytime you place a bear trap, which helps a bit with his map mobility and can also be used as a helping tool during chases when setting up aggressive traps. But that doesn't fix the inherent problems of the Trapper's design. His biggest weakness is the early game, as you have one of the worst ones out of all killers in the cast. You have to manually go towards the places where you plan on setting up your traps and hope that no survivors are aware of this, because if they are, they can easily disable that start you had to sacrifice 3 gens for and force you to come back and reset them again. So, the only strength of the Trapper is hope for a snowball, because one well-placed trap can completely shut down a strong loop and end chases quickly, which usually leads to more survivors making mistakes and playing carelessly when they try to be altruistic. And don't let a Trapper hook you in the basement of the shack, because that's basically a guaranteed kill. Unlike the previous 2 characters, Trapper does have a saving grace. It's called the Iridescent Stone. This simple add-on fixes 2 of the biggest problems the Trapper has, which is his time management and pressure. This add-on will open a random trap every 30 seconds, so you can just set and forget traps as they will work by themselves. And also, since survivors don't know when they open, they might end up falling into a trap that someone else closed, which helps for the snowball. But even then, it's an iridescent add-on, which means unless you spend a lot of blood points on this character, you won't have easy access to this one. And if you have to use iridescent add-ons to call this killer B tier, it just proves my point on how Trapper is inherently weak. And the final member of the needs a rework tier is the legendary Michael Myers. And he is still by far the most outdated killer because there are a lot of flaws with his power which have not aged well. For starters, Myers on tier 1 is the weakest killer in the entire game. You are very slow, your basic attack has no range, and the only thing you have is the undetectable status effect, so you want to leave this state as fast as possible. And this is a remnant of old DBD where the devs thought that true stealth was too overpowered. Then we have the second problem, which is the fact that you can run out of stalk juice if you watch a survivor too much. So you're technically one of the only killers who can run out of his power if the match extends too long. Tier 3 is a very nice power, as it allows you to instantly down survivors with one basic hit, and usually a lot of survivors fear Myers during this state, so they will play in a more safe way, and that can hurt you a lot if they start pre-dropping pallets or running away early from generators, as you still have to play as an M1 killer, and if you accidentally trigger tier 3, you might end up wasting a lot of its time for absolutely nothing. We also cannot forget to mention Tombstone Piece, which is arguably the strongest individual add-on in the entire game, as it allows you to eliminate a survivor from the match with the press of a button. But honestly, this add-on is clearly an outlier, so I don't think we should base strength on one single add-on. There are way more flaws with Myers' power, like the fact that he's the only stealth killer without access to the undetectable status effect once you leave tier 1, meaning survivors with killer aura reading perks can track you during the entire match, or the fact that stalking from afar is punished, and instead you have to come close to the survivors in order to stalk faster. With a bunch of quality of life changes, which are coming soon in November, I genuinely believe Myers could become a decent killer, because I think his power is actually well designed. Now let's start talking about average killers. They are okay, but against good survivors, they will suffer. The Legion are a fan favorite between a lot of casual players due to how easy they are to play and how simple their design is. The Legion's power allows them to get the first hit extremely easily, as survivors basically have no counterplay whatsoever to the first hit of Feral Frenzy, and if you are lucky enough to get the 5th hit, you can completely down a survivor with your power. Feral Frenzy also allows you to track survivors no matter what, which is a massive plus for new players that still don't know well how to find survivors. The mending survivors get after a hit is also a decent way to slow down the match, even if it slows the game down just a little bit. The problem with the Legion comes from its own simplicity, as the moment survivors are not scared of you, you are basically an M1 killer where survivors are injured, since you have to play by the rules in order to down a survivor with a basic attack. If survivors spread out instead of being close together, you will also immediately suffer, as no longer can you use your power in order to hit various survivors in one frenzy, losing out on the tracking, lethality, and slowdown part of their kit. There are also other ways to hurt the Legion a lot. If a survivor is smart and they are hit with Feral Frenzy, they can willingly chase Legion around in order to body block their teammates. Since hitting a survivor that is on deep wounds causes your power to be deactivated, this means you are put in a situation where you have to stop your Feral Frenzy in order to continue, and the best of the best survivors are also capable of stunning you out of your power, leaving you again as a powerless M1 killer. So their power is quite binary, and it can be summed up in a simple question. Are the survivors wasting their time on healing? If the answer is yes, you are going to win as Legion. If the answer is no, you are in for a tough match. It can be argued that the Legion are worse than Myers or Trapper, as in my opinion, both of those killers can get downs faster, yet I still value their ability to injure survivors so easily, as a lot of the player base are simply not comfortable with being injured, and since the majority of survivors are solo queue, they don't know how to spread out efficiently to prevent the Legion that 5th hit or body block for their teammates. Despite receiving some quite decent buffs to her ambush attack after my last ranking, the pig is still stuck as one of the most average killers in the entire game. Everything I said in the past is still true for her. She is a jack of all trades, master of none, with the worst stealth power in DBD, which hurts her map traversal, a decent slowdown, which requires you to down a survivor in order to get value from it, and a mediocre anti-loop power, which is now a bit better than before. The pig's main tool is the ambush, which can guarantee hits on certain loops if you play it well, putting her above the D tier just with that. Smart survivors can still just leave the loop once they see you starting the ambush, and you lose a lot of distance when you start crouching. And you also need ambush add-ons in order to make that power usable in even more loops. Her stealth is so bad that I don't even want to mention it. All I have to say is that she would be stronger if they increased her speed while crouched even more, and also made her stop announcing with a megaphone that she is near you and ready to attack. There is a reason why the vast majority of pig players don't use her ambush and instead just uncrouch and basic attack. Her reverse bear traps are quite interesting, as they can be pretty effective tools for extending the duration of the match and also potentially give you a kill, but keep in mind that getting a head pop is extremely rare and requires some very lucky conditions in order to get it. Still, It's an inherent slowdown on her kit, and this is very strong against casual players and solo queue, and is the reason why she has such a high kill rate according to Behavior's official statistics. But against good survivors, Pig is just a glorified M1 killer, and her flaws start to shine. Coordinated survivors are capable of repairing various gens at once instead of finishing them one by one, giving trapped survivors plenty of time to remove their traps without the time pressure. And if survivors do rush generators, your traps are completely worthless in the endgame, so you are fully reliant on your ability to keep downing survivors fast in order to use your traps before that happens. And the final member of this category, we have the iconic Ghostface, who is surprisingly popular with the casuals despite having one of the lowest kill rates out of all the killer cast. The Ghostface is, in my opinion, the only true stealth killer in DBD and the best designed stealth killer as well, because unlike the others, you actually have to plan ahead and play in a stealthy way in order to get good results. Ghostface is a surprisingly hard killer to play with, and one of the reasons I would not recommend a new player to use him. Being a good Ghostface requires you to know the maps so you can route in weird paths towards survivors in order to ambush them with the insta-down. You can also walk around the map marking survivors to 99% in order to ambush them in a later situation where they get too cocky and think you don't have any stock on them. Ghostface jankiness on the reveal can also be used as a double-edged sword, as sometimes it will make survivors reveal you even behind cover, while other times it can allow you to stalk a survivor during a chase. His ability to become undetectable at will is also very underrated, as it can catch a lot of survivors off guard while they repair generators, or also remove your red stain during a chase in order to mind game them in a tall loop, which can be especially strong on indoor maps where Ghostface truly shines. There is a lot of versatility on how your stealth is used, which is great for Ghostface mains. But just like you with your social anxiety that prevents you from asking your crush out, Ghostface struggles hard when he is found in outdoor maps, as now he has less routes to take in order to ambush survivors and is easier to spot as well. And let's not forget about survivors playing in a very smart way, which can shut down his power entirely. There are survivors who intentionally take a protection hit while you carry a survivor in order to remove the stock progress out. Other good survivors will constantly call out your position to the rest of the team and also force you out of your power, which leaves you as an M1 killer with 0 anti-loop capabilities and 0 map traversal. Ghostface can get results if you play him well, but put the same effort on any killer ranked higher and you will end up getting even better results. And we are finally out of the average category, and now we go to the decent category, which is the biggest category. These killers are clearly not top tier, but they can still work with certain builds and playstyles. The last time I made my ranking, Sadako was one of the strongest killers in the game. Now, Sadako is potentially one of the most controversial placements in my ranking, since a lot of players believe that she is back at being weak, but after the huge changes to her kit, I think she is kinda okay. Sadako is a hybrid stealth killer with built-in slowdown, a global presence, and a small chase power, which are some of the best ingredients for a noob stomper formula, and that's exactly what she is, as we know thanks to her very high kill rate. Sadako's Condemned can be a very brutal issue for survivors that are not prepared for it, as by spamming TV teleports when you know someone is near a specific TV, you can stack various Condemned stacks in less than a minute, and survivors now simply cannot ignore these conditions or else they straight up get eliminated from the match, giving Sadako a massive advantage. Just like the Ghostface, she also thrives on indoor maps, as usually they are smaller and feature 2 floors, creating more places where survivors get condemned on teleports. Combine that with her best condemned add-ons, and she suddenly shoots up straight to one of the strongest killers in the cast. These TVs also give Sadako a global presence all over the map, as she can teleport near generators at any point in the match with one of the fastest teleports out of all killer powers, and give you a stack of condemned on top, which is something Sadako can use to her advantage in order to track the position of certain survivors with more macro knowledge, and unlike Freddy, she can use these TVs through the entire match, sometimes even as tools to end a chase when survivors don't expect it, and you combine that with her fingernail add-on. Finally, her stealth can catch survivors off guard, and her demanifested state can be used as a power to help in chases, as while you are demanifested, you completely ignore collision with survivors, which allows her to tunnel more efficiently and prevent body blocks, as well as completely ignore pallet stuns, allowing her to chew through pallets with aggressive chase builds. With Reiko's Watch, you can even try to mind game survivors in some loops by taking advantage of your intermittent invisibility once you manifest. The issue of Sadako is that her power becomes weaker when survivors know how to counter you. Her stealth is completely useless against survivors that are competent or that have the visual heartbeat indicator turned on. In fact, with this, you can know if Sadako has teleported next to you, as the heart will immediately indicate that she is nearby once she teleports. Survivors that pick up tapes and deactivate TVs are damaging Sadako on both ways, with the first being that they ignore the condemned status effect and create more points when there is less condemnation spreading, and second being that Sadako has less TVs to teleport to. In other words, your match quality will drastically change depending on the knowledge survivors have against your kit. The Clown is the first killer on this ranking that I believe is perfect as is. After the last buff, which added 2 extra bottles to his base kit, the Clown is now able to consistently use his purple and yellow bottles more during a match without having to reload, and the 2 extra bottles also help Clown players that are still not good and miss. His power is fully focused on the 1 versus 4, the chases. He has no inherent slowdown on his kit, no stealth, and no map mobility besides using yellow bottles to run around the map faster, which is not as good, and you still have to waste time reloading your bottles before starting a chase. But during a chase, the Clown's bottles are very good, as slowing the survivor's movement allows you to catch up to them faster, or prevent them from doing one extra loop like they could to another killer, and this is elevated when you understand how to use the yellow bottles correctly in order to create an even higher speed differential. With that, getting hit is basically guaranteed with the Clown, which is the reason why he suffers a lot when survivors start to play in a very safe way, pre-dropping pallets and running early when they hear your terror radius. And that's when you can see the Clown's flaws with a kit designed fully for the micro element of DBD instead of the macro, as your only slowdown comes from your ability to down survivors very fast, or else they will just rush generators with absolutely no pressure whatsoever from you. The Clown also has no tools to help against the strongest perks survivors can run, and perks that allow survivors to heal faster or extend chases still hurt him a lot. For that reason, despite the Clown being perfect as is, his power design simply doesn't allow him to go higher. I have always called the Demogorgon as the most balanced killer behavior has ever released, and Demo being so low just shows you how power creep has affected this game a lot, with the various reworks and buffs making killers stronger overall, and the new killers with bloated kits or extremely strong anti-loops. Demogorgon has everything you need in order to dominate in a match and not feel like something is lacking. Its portals allow Demo to have map traversal anywhere it wants, as they can be set up in specific places, unlike the other teleport abilities which are forced with map generation, and it can also be used as a slowdown tool as well as a tracking tool, as by opening your head, you're able to see survivors near your active portals. This can be especially strong when you use this ability to the maximum potential and bring a hex build or a basement camping build, as there is basically nothing survivors can do to counter it if you play it right. Then we have the Demogorgon Shred ability, which is its anti-loop power and is very strong when used right. You can make some safe loops for other killers completely unsafe against you, use it to force survivors to drop pallets and break them faster, or even use it to zone survivors, making them lose distance while they try to dodge you. There are a lot of ways to use the shred attack during a chase, which gives Demogorgon a lot of skill expression. Yet again, Demogorgon is so low simply because there is nothing that it excels at compared to other characters. The tunnels have to be manually set in order for them to get value, and once placed, you cannot remove them, so it is basically possible for some of your tunnels to end up useless in the end game. Demogorgon is also the loudest character in the entire game, and everything you do, everyone all around the map will know, so there is no way to surprise survivors by teleporting to portals, as everyone will know, and anytime you attack or use the shred, the rest of the survivors know that they can work on generators safely. In a way, the same weakness that Clown has, Demogorgon has it too, because the moment you get survivors rushing gens, you simply cannot keep up with your power unless you are really good at Demogorgon. Did I mention that Demogorgon has a stealth component on its kit too? Survivors breaking portals become oblivious, which can allow Demo some hits in some matches, and also anytime you come out of a portal, you are undetectable for some seconds, which is only there for technical reasons to make the Terradius music fade in instead of just suddenly appearing. Demo is confirmed to receive some changes in the near future, which I assume are going to be buffs, maybe removing invisible walls and buffing the portal somehow. With those buffs, there is a chance that Demogorgon will be ranked higher on my next ranking video. The Knight is the first character that got a complete rework to its power, as now he is able to choose which guard to summon, each of them having a different cooldown and specialization, and he can also cancel guards as well as summon them while another guard is out. This all came at the cost of not allowing Knight to summon guards immediately during a loop, basically guaranteeing a hit. In my opinion, this was a net buff for the Knight, as now the Knight can finally shine on the macro playstyle he was always intended to play with, and this is a playstyle that not a lot of players know how to counter. The Knight's strongest part of his arsenal is the guard snipes. If you know where survivors are, you can interrupt them repairing gens or resetting by summoning a guard far away, surprising the survivors and forcing them to waste their time while they are chased by one of your guards. The Jailer is incredible at this, and he has by far the longest hunt duration out of all the guards, as well as the longest time before a flag becomes pickable by the survivors. So in a way, this works as a slowdown, but remember that while the Jailer is chasing a survivor, you are essentially an M1 killer, as you are left with no power for the duration of that chase. Then we have the Assassin, which is basically a guaranteed hit unless the survivors know how to loop guards, which all it requires is touching a window and looping back to the flag. If you are able to pressure the flag, and thanks to the fact that the vast majority of survivors are simply bad, the Assassin will get value almost every time you snipe someone with him, making him one of the most valuable guards of the arsenal for the average player. And finally, we have the Carnifex, which is more focused on allowing the Knight to instantly break pallets during a chase, giving Knight some kind of chase power, but this can be countered by survivors that know you are about to use Carnifex in order to instantly break a pallet, so good survivors will fake it, making you lose distance during a chase. Still, this is stronger than before, as now you can simply cancel the guard when you see the survivors didn't drop the pallet. As you noticed, for each guard I talked about, there is a clear issue that survivors can take advantage of. So for that reason, despite being stronger than before, the Knight is still overall weak compared to the other killers, which get hits faster and are significantly harder to counter. Knight is a character that the more survivors will play against him, the weaker he will become, very similar to Sadako. And funnily enough, the biggest counterplay he has is not found in his power design, it's found in the ability of the developers, because I cannot believe the amount of bugs this killer has currently. Being stunned while summoning guards, the orb making footstep sounds revealing your position, bugs with the guard's AI, animation issues. He is very broken, and it wouldn't surprise me if they kill switch him sometime soon like they did the last time. Trickster is a very complicated character to rank, especially after the rework which is planned by behavior to be reverted in the future. Yet at the same time, I feel like Trickster is just significantly easier to play with and also easier to get results with. As it is right now with the current Trickster, I do feel he's stronger than he was before simply because he is now a 115% killer and he has access to main event more. Before the rework, the Trickster was a slow killer who had to use his power to compensate and down survivors very fast, and this led to Trickster being a killer of extremes, as you either down survivors incredibly fast with no counterplay whatsoever, punishing bad positioning better than the vast majority of killers, or take way too long to down a survivor in loops like the Shack. So now, thanks to the Trickster being 115%, you can ignore the power and just chase survivors like a normal M1 killer. It also helps Trickster catch up to survivors and move around the map overall, as despite being a range killer, his random recoil didn't allow him to snipe survivors constantly from far away, which is something that now is possible due to the recoil removal. And then we have the main event, which is now active after only 8 knives. And this allows Trickster to just play in a very careless way and spam the knives only to get rewarded. Find a survivor that is outpositioned or transfer the chase to a healthy survivor and you can take them down faster than the majority of killers can. And this is a great moment to transfer into how strong Trickster is on unhook situations, as he is the first killer from this ranking that is capable of defending a hook with nothing survivors can do. If they even attempt to save their teammates, Trickster can down the savior incredibly fast, and if someone else tries to take a protection hit with main event, Trickster can mow survivors down faster than the speed at which Trickster pick rate dropped after the rework. The Doctor has received a lot of small buffs for all aspects of his power, so overall, he is stronger than he was before, and to be honest, he is perfect as is currently. The range of his shock therapy is longer, as well as the delay between shocks being faster, which is by far the most significant buff and the one that makes Doctor less dependent on discipline add-ons. The static blast cooldown is also reduced, buffing his already insane tracking. Despite all of this, there isn't much I can say about the Doctor because essentially he's still the same exact killer. His anti-loop power is indeed better and now works on more loops, but it is still dependent on the ping of the match as well as the skill of the survivors, and you also run the risk of waiting too much time in order to hit a survivor when other anti-loop powers allow you to straight up injure the survivors and bypass pallets. Static Blast is an amazing tool for new players, as it allows you to know where survivors are found at the press of a button, and even if there is nobody around, the cooldown now is significantly shorter than before, allowing you to try again in a different spot. The madness mechanic is decent as a way to make survivors miss some skill checks if they are new, or prevent them from using items when they are on madness tier 3. With specific add-ons, you can also track survivors thanks to the hallucinations that appear next to them, which is another tool to help with tracking. I think the most underrated ability of the Doctor is the power to cancel unhooks from a distance in order to confirm a trade. In fact, if played correctly, you can use the shock therapy in order to confirm a survivor going on second stage if they take too long to unhook, but this is now weaker now that the hook stages have been extended 10 seconds. Just like Sadako, I feel like the Hag is one of the hardest killers to rank correctly because of how divisive her power is depending on who you play against. Hag is the only other setup killer besides Trapper, so you might expect that she also has a very slow early game. However, her mood traps are way better as they give her both lethality as well as map mobility all in one. The hag can set up a web of traps faster than Trapper can because she doesn't have to waste time picking them up and instead can go directly to start setting up. And the traps individually are not as valuable as a bear trap, so even if a survivor removes a mud trap or steps on it, you can just go back and replace it, wasting the survivor's time. Hag's strongest aspect is her insane ability to snowball an entire match and punish survivor mistakes like no other killer can. She is the only killer in the entire game who can set up traps near hooked survivors, allowing her to camp a hook from further away than other killers can, preventing the anti-face camp mechanic from even working while slowing the unhooker's attempt to save their teammates. And if the web of mud traps is set correctly, the hag can also completely invalidate various loops and down survivors extremely fast. And since she attacks with basic hits instead of power ones, she can also take advantage of exposed perks like Noed, which are very strong on her. The only counterplay hag has is to play very safe and avoid going down at all costs to prevent her from setting up a web around a hooked survivor, and have your teammates help you break traps during the match, especially when she picks up a survivor to hook them, as that is when you can't do anything to defend your traps being broken. These matches against survivors with the coordination of the Navy SEALs can make Hag feel like the worst killer in the entire game, because survivors can invalidate your traps and you are stuck as a 110% killer that has to constantly fight survivors by setting up the mud traps in order to have any chance at winning. Now there is another playstyle with the Hag that is so different that for me she's a completely new killer, and that is the Chase Hag build, or Chag as most of you know it, and this build was buffed a lot. While I still think the Hag is stronger base kit, I do have to mention that I find Chag to be one of the most fun killers in the entire game. If you saw my past ranking video, you would know that I low-key really vibe with Bubba, and I think he is a very underrated killer, as many of the players think that he is just useful to be a basement camper with the worst, most toxic player base out of all killer mains. But I think Bubba is a very strong and aggressive chase killer who can punish survivors very hard and has a surprisingly high skill ceiling. And since my last vid, Leatherface got various buffs to his power, giving him various add-ons base kit as well as improving the collision of a lot of structures in the map. And while there are still some issues, overall Bubba is significantly better than he was before, despite his peak strength being almost the same, since add-on wise he is almost the exact same killer as before. It's the fact that they made him easier to play with and get results what puts Bubba above the other decent killers in this video. Leatherface's aggressive power allows him to break pallets extremely fast during chases, which makes future chases in those areas worse as you create dead zones for survivors. So if you down a survivor and hook them in a dead zone, there is basically nothing their teammates can do in order to save them. Bubba can guarantee a sacrifice in the endgame, which is something not a lot of characters can do, even in the S tier category, and he has a lot of synergy with good perks like stealth ones in order to catch survivors off guard, as well as perks that block windows, which is by far his biggest weakness and why I personally do not recommend playing Bubba without Bamboozle. Still, even with such a strong chase power, Bubba's window weakness is something that good survivors can exploit, and colliding your chainsaw with a structure is very punishing and wastes a lot of your crucial time during a match, as outside of a chase, you have basically no map mobility and no pressure. The Deathslinger is another chase focused killer where his entire power revolves around the 1 vs 1, and dare I say, Slinger has the best 1 vs 1 power. Unlike the other range killers, Deathslinger is the one that punishes pre-running the most, as you can bring the survivors back to your location by reeling them in, which prevents them from getting a lot of distance from you, unlike a snipe from the Huntress can. And if they do not end up running early, Slinger has the potential to have one of the strongest true taps in the entire game. even if you hit a survivor and you do not catch them, the survivors will still suffer from the deep wound status effect, completely countering perks like Dead Heart and slowing survivors down a bit if they do end up escaping a chase. Additionally, Deathslinger is the only ranged killer who can take advantage of basic attack perks like Sloppy Butcher or Noid, giving him significantly more synergies with perks than the other ranged killers can have. And that's not even mentioning his high level plays that can be done when you are good at this killer. Some Slinger mains know the collision of every wall in every map, allowing them to shoot in between cracks that survivors would never expect, and also some Slingers are able to reel survivors in before they unhook their teammates in order to confirm a survivor going to second stage or death hook. So, if I am gassing up this killer so much, why is he not A tier? That's because of his weakness, which are very similar to the clown. Slinger is a 110% killer, so you rely on your power significantly more than other 115% killers do. This means that you have to hit your shots with Slinger, or else you are going to want to pay a visit to the gallows after that humiliating match. The second issue is altruistic plays. Good survivors are capable of standing in between the survivor you are reeling in order to body block and prevent you from tunneling out a survivor from the match, and most of the time you cannot do anything to prevent it. So you have to play very aggressively and down survivors very fast, putting all of your eggs in the same basket. Next up, another killer who loves chaining their survivors is the Cenobite, who instead of being micro-focused, this killer has a macro component that allows him to excel compared to the rest. The Cenobite's anti-loop power is the chains, which he can use in certain loops in order to slow survivors down and try to take a hit. Against console players, the chains are especially strong because they will accidentally slow vault a pallet instead of breaking their chains, as it's the same button. The chains can also be used to interrupt survivors healing or repairing, as well as interrupt survivors solving the lament configuration. The lament configuration is the part that I think puts Cenobite above the average killer and the reason why he has one of the highest kill rates out of all characters. Passively, a chain hunt timer will slowly tick up until it becomes active after 90 seconds. When the chain hunt is active, all survivors will scream when it starts, revealing their position, and chains will passively attack them, preventing survivors from staying on the same place for a long period of time. This forces at least one survivor to go towards the lament configuration box in order to solve it, which will reset the timer back to 0. Against coordinated survivors, only one of them has to go to the box in order to solve it, and in fact, the best survivors will start solving the box once you pick a survivor to hook them, as then Pinhead is forced to either drop the survivor and teleport to the box solver, which most of the times is a horrible idea, or simply let the survivor solve the box. Against solo survivors, the chain hunt can be an absolute nightmare. Due to the bystander effect, most survivors will think that someone else is going for the chain hunt, only to discover that all 4 of you are lazy bums, forcing one survivor to go to the box once it's too late. And if a bad survivor picks up the box, Pinhead can abuse this by playing into a very aggressive playstyle that can allow you to have infinite chain hunts for the remainder of the match, giving Pinhead a tremendous slowdown value where you and the survivors are constantly playing a game of tug of war on who gets to find the box first. Pinhead still has to catch the box solver as a barely M1 killer, as the chain power is not that strong compared to other anti-loop powers. The worst part of his power is the fact that you can break your own chains, and this can be especially annoying when you break an important chain during a chain hunt which could have given you a hit, but due to RNG, now the survivor is safe. Overall, if you play this killer against casuals without focusing on the macro playstyle, you are going to win most of your matches. But the moment you play against a survivor that is decent and also coordinated with their team, that's when you are going to tear up and waste your good suffering. The devs are planning to give changes to this character, and despite me ranking him so low, there is a high chance that he gets a nerf because his kill rate is very high. The Wraith is another killer very similar to the Cenobite in that there are two playstyles which give drastically different results, and it depends on which one you master what will give your opinion on the Wraith's power. I stand by the fact that Wraith is the perfect hit and run killer, where instead of focusing on individual chases like an M1 killer, Wraith takes advantage of his stealth in order to ambush survivors in dead zones and use his mobility in order to guide survivors to weak places in the map. The Wraith's very fast speed during cloak as well as complete stealth allows him to come very close to survivors before they start running early, sometimes even allowing Wraith to body block them and guarantee a hit, which is already a counter to one of the biggest issues many killers suffer from, which is the hold W playstyle. His fast speed after uncloaking also allows Wraith to use his power as a sort of anti-loop, and even after the nerfs, it can still be used effectively if you want to take down a player during a chase. Unlike the majority of killers, being injured against Wraith is actually very dangerous, as a lot of times survivors are simply not prepared to escape quickly before the Wraith can down them, and also the Wraith's speed is so fast during cloak that he can start uncloaking in front of you, using his body to prevent you from taking a vault or dropping a pallet, and that is the difference between bad Wraiths who uncloak behind you and the good Wraiths who take advantage of his power in order to guarantee hits. I think a lot of players simply don't know how to use Wraith because he is a simple killer that is also free for anyone starting to play, and new players don't know how to play DBD on a macro level. If you enter the gameplay loop of hitting a survivor that is outpositioned, get one pallet or two, leave, hit another survivor that is outpositioned, repeat the process, and then find the injured survivors in dead zones to down them and repeat again, is a playstyle that a lot of solo survivors don't know how to counter, and even good survivors can struggle against. Nemesis got a significant glow up since my last video, receiving 3 incredibly strong buffs that make him way better to play and get results with. For starters, the Nemesis can reach his mutation tiers faster than before, especially with Marvin's Blood, which makes it possible to get tier 2 in one chase. The second change is that now survivors do get hindered when they are first contaminated, allowing Nemesis to take down a health state faster than he could before, as the distance survivors get for contamination is way less. And be careful who you call ugly in high school, because Licker's Tongue, one of the worst addons in the entire game, is now one of the best addons Nemesis has because it makes the slowdown even longer. And finally, his tier 3 tentacle strike is now longer than before, and with this killer, size does matter. The length of his tentacle is so large that I would go as far as to say it's too much, and I was okay with the average size he had before. For survivors, it's harder to get distance and dodge the tentacle, and for Nemesis, it's easier to get hits on survivors that are animation locked, but now tier 3 does feel like a significant improvement compared to the pathetic state it was before the buff. Nemesis is still the same pallet shredder he was before, and his zombies work exactly the same. Sometimes they are really good at annoying the survivors and passively slow down the game a bit. Other times they are as useful as bringing self-care with no mither. Now that your tentacle strike is so strong, Nemesis doesn't rely on the zombies that much, and it's best to think of them as a bonus that sometimes can give a lot of value, but you shouldn't rely on it to win you a match. And as the first new killer since my last tier list, we have the Lich, one of the most interesting and complex characters on paper that they have ever released. Vecna has access to 4 different spells, each being completely unique in its use and value, as well as with their own separate cooldowns from other spells. Additionally, Vecna has a sort of slowdown built in on his power, as survivors will be able to interact with treasure chests all over the map in order to get magic items to counter some of Vecna's spells, as well as the potential of getting a special legendary item that gives survivors completely unique powers. Vecna's first spell is Fly, which is his mobility spell. By casting Fly, you enter a dash state which allows you to catch up to survivors faster, move around the map as well as ignore walls and pallets, which can be used offensively during a chase in order to get a hit early. The magic item survivors have to counter this will reveal your aura anytime you fly, but considering that Vecna's fly spell makes a loud noise either way, I don't think this item is as strong outside of giving survivors your current location while they are repairing gens. Vecna's second spell is Fly of the Damned, and it's his range attack spell, and this is where the majority of Vecna players completely fail at understanding the true power of this attack. A lot of players try to use this as a way to get a hit on survivors, where one of the best uses for it is to place survivors in positions where they are forced to crouch in order to avoid this attack, which will allow you to basic hit them either way. The skeletons can also be used on slopes in order to spawn them closer to the ground, where survivors cannot dodge them by crouching, and instead they actually have to dodge the projectile. Vecna can also use the skeletons to snipe survivors that are animation locked, and by far the strongest use of it is to spawn the skeletons on top of survivors to injure them behind loops, pallets, and even full walls. The skeletons have a very high skill ceiling to them, and mastering it is part of seeing the true potential of Vecna's strength. The magic items survivors have to counter this spell will reveal the aura of the skeletons, which is again not that useful during a chase. Vecna's magic hand is his anti-loop power, and this allows Vecna to block a pallet from being dropped, or lift a pallet in order to hit a survivor that doesn't expect it. This spell allows Vecna to put survivors in lose-lose situations, very similar to how the Doctor's anti-loop works. Using this spell incorrectly can bite you in the butt very hard, as lifting a pallet allows another survivor to use it in a different chase. The magic item this spell has is also the strongest, as it gives survivors a haste bonus speed which might allow them to loop you around the pallet, making Mage Hand useless. Finally, Vecna has a built-in tracking spell, which is the Dispelling Sphere, revealing the location of survivors as well as disabling their magic items. So this spell is important in order to know which items the survivors have and disable them before a chase. Survivors cannot see the aura of a sphere unless they have a magic item, so that's why, in my opinion, it's the second best item survivors have. The problem Vecna has that doesn't allow me to put him any higher is the fact that you are forced to use his spells correctly in order to get value during a chase, because if you don't, you end up with a very long spell cooldown as an M1 killer, and potentially you end up worse than before. If you misuse Fly and survivors counter it by vaulting back, now you don't have any map mobility tool. If you miss your skeletons, your lethality goes down a lot. Mage Hand could bring a good pallet into the batch or let you get stunned twice, which smart survivors know how to do, and wasting the Dispelling Sphere allows survivors to use their items to know your location when you cast spells. The legendary items are also a huge detriment for Vecna, especially Vecna's Hand, which allows survivors to teleport away to a random locker around the map. This is basically an escape from jail card, which even at worst will always make Vecna lose his precious time. So overall, Vecna has potential to be strong, and he will be strong for some time because of how complex he is to understand for the casual player. But against competent survivors that understand how each of Vecna's spells works and know how easy he is to counterplay, he has a lot of flaws. Vecna is confirmed to be getting changes soon, so I am eager to see what behavior is cooking. And now let's talk about Dredge and the biggest glow up a killer has ever received in terms of buffs, as they made every single action of the Dredge faster. Most importantly, their teleport to locker speed is so fast by default that it allows you to have a presence all over the map, except for one reason which I will mention later. The Dredge has everything on their kit to be strong, as they have one of the most insane map mobility out of all killers in the game, as well as a decent anti-loop power thanks to the Remnant that forces survivors into a 50-50 situation where the best mind gamer wins. The Remnant can also be used in creative ways to get hits and drops that survivors would not expect, like is the case with the insane God window found in Garden of Joy. The Locker teleport can also be used to catch survivors off guard while in chase, cutting them off before a strong loop, or to immediately start pressuring another survivor from across the map after hooking, of course, as long as no survivor has locked the locks. By playing Dredge well, there is no downtime where you are not pressuring a survivor, as you can constantly harass one by either chasing them or forcing them to interrupt whatever action they were doing. And now that Dredge is overall stronger and faster, it means that Nightfall is also easier to achieve, and the Nightfall is an absolute nightmare for casual players, even stronger now that Dredge is quieter. Finally, after so long, you get the undetectable status effect. Survivors don't know where you are, as you can be anywhere thanks to his map mobility, and the Dredge gets one of the best tracking abilities out of all killers, which prevents survivors from hiding. In fact, you can use the Remnant in order to teleport back to the same place to discover if there are any survivors trying to pallet or flashlight save. The Dredge can absolutely snowball during Nightfall by taking advantage of the insane mobility and pressure Dredge can put and slug survivors around the map, or by playing in a hit and run style and preventing survivors from resetting. Teleporting all over the map also helps you break the locks survivors put on lockers, so that next time, survivors are not as safe on that location. Sometimes, you can also get lucky and find a survivor locking a locker, which grants you an insane advantage. After the buffs, I genuinely believe that Dredge is very well designed, and the only flaw it has is the locker RNG, which is the biggest issue that makes Dredge not viable as an A-tier killer on all matches. There are some maps, like Midwich or RPD, where the Dredge becomes a monster that can be anywhere, anytime. But in other maps, like Larry's Memorial Institute or Shelter Woods, there are massive dead zones where there are no lockers whatsoever on them. If behavior added more lockers to maps that lack them, like the Swamp Realm, Dredge could easily become a fantastic pick as it has mobility and pressure, but this map dependency is what led me to rank Dredge as the last killer from the decent category. And now let's talk about very good killers. These killers are top tier, and in my opinion they can all compete against strong survivors depending on the skill of the player. Let's start this category with the Xenomorph, so you know why I think Xeno is a step above Dredge. The Xenomorph is a great example of what the perfect organism is. It is by far one of the best map mobility powers in the entire game, and it's in fact the only map mobility secondary power that you can use from the start of the match, as there is zero cooldown whatsoever, so you can immediately take advantage of lethal pursuer value, you can travel to any control station at any point in the match, and there is nothing survivors can do to prevent it, unlike with Sadako or Dredge. But the map mobility is not just for traversal, it also helps you charge the anti-loop power faster, track survivors thanks to the footsteps that you can sense inside the tunnels, and also deactivate turrets and detect survivors when you exit a control station. Overall, Xenomorph's map presence is very strong. And now let's talk about the anti-loop, which is the tail attack, an extremely strong power which makes a lot of loops a guaranteed hit for Xenomorph. As long as you have access to the tail attack, you make various loops completely useless, as well as give you a very strong lethality. So, by what I am talking, Xenomorph should be an S tier killer, but there are two problems that prevent Xenomorph from being any higher, and that's the flame turrets. Survivors can place the flame turrets in order to remove your tail attack from you, forcing you to either play as an M1 killer or waste a bit of time to get it back by going back to the lockers. The flame turrets also will beep faster the closer you are to them, so survivors have a heads up when you are near them inside the tunnels, and also completely remove any chance for Xenomorph to play in a stealthy way against competent survivors. In the vast majority of matches, survivors don't know how to use the turrets efficiently, so they just place them near tunnels, which allows you to break them fast without them being a problem. but against good survivors who know how to use them, playing Xenomorph is extremely frustrating, and one of the reasons why, despite being considered by many players as one of the strongest killers in the game, Xenomorph has a very small pick rate. The Huntress, who was already considered one of the strongest killers in my last video, received a buff that gave her 2 extra hatchets by default, something that a lot of players didn't understand why, but it makes sense when you consider that buff to be catered for newer players, as she is by far the killer with the highest pick rate in the entire game, and the reason she is so popular is because of how good and well designed she is. Her power is very simple: throw a hatchet to injure survivors, but her skill ceiling is almost infinite, as the difference between a bad Huntress and a pro Huntress is so severe that it looks like you are playing against a different killer. The Huntress can get some of the fastest downs in the entire game, and in fact, she has one of the best lethality out of all killers for 2 reasons. The first being her 2-tap potential, which she can do on almost all maps, and the fact that she can slug so easily and start injuring other survivors incredibly fast too. The Huntress is also really strong in camping situations, as she can defend hooks from far away, and since she has a 2-tap factor, survivors are forced to trade if the Huntress defends the hooks. Her hatchets, just like with the Deathslinger, can also be used in order to zone survivors, forcing them in lose-lose situations, adding extra points to her lethality factor. With good aim and good snipes, the Huntress can make survivors scared from her even from a distance. Overall, even if she has no map mobility whatsoever, I think what keeps her on top is her snowball potential, which can make a lost match into a win if you start hitting all of the shots in a fast succession or play in a disgusting way by tunneling survivors or camping them, because in the end, it doesn't matter if Huntress has slow mobility, since she can injure survivors from across the map. Her biggest weakness is survivors that know how to play by using the environment in order to counter her. Survivors that hide from cross-map snipes, or those that play with weird movement, so it's harder to predict for the Huntress, and especially indoor maps, which can be a complete nightmare for her. Next up, we have the newest killer release in Dead by Daylight, and that is the Dark Lord, also known as Lord Dracula. Dracula back in the PTB was considered a B-tier killer at best due to how his power was a weaker version of other killers' abilities. However, after some of the tweaks they did to him, I think Dracula is easy material to be a very strong killer, to the point that I believe the future changes they will give him are going to be nerfs. Dracula has 3 powers on his kit, the first one being the flame pillars on his vampire form. This is a weaker version of Pyramid Head's attack, as you cannot penetrate walls with it, but it still works fundamentally almost the same, so it's a very decent anti-loop power in a lot of situations, and the range is deceptively large. The best part of the flame pillars is also how they can be used to guarantee a trade in the endgame, as you can camp very efficiently with the flame pillars charged since they can go through survivors. This single-handedly makes Dracula an already top tier killer, because if you want a kill, you are going to get it no matter what, and it's impossible for survivors to counter unless you make a mistake. Then we have the wolf form, which allows Dracula to track survivors thanks to the scent orbs, makes him run a bit faster, and also gives access to the Wolf Pounce attack, which is very similar to a mini Wesker power. Overall, this is the weakest power he has, especially after the hook tech removal, but it's still decent as a way to catch up after survivors, or get hits in certain places where you can't just M1. I still think the flame pillars are just better option in the majority of cases. And finally, we have the bat form, and this is in my opinion criminally underrated. Everyone I have seen says that the bat form is just a weaker form of the spirit's power, mainly because you cannot see survivors while using it, but the bat form is by far the best form Dracula has, and the reason why I rank him so high. First of all, the bat form grants Dracula one of the most insane map mobility powers in the entire game, whereas with Dredge, you depend on lockers to teleport. There are usually vaults all over the map which you can take advantage of, so now the busted window in Batham is an amazing tool to completely leave the basement of the school by clicking one button, or to come to the basement from the street level in order to tunnel the camp survivor out. This is insanely strong on RPD, Midwich, the game, or any map with elevations where you can teleport to the second floor just like the nurse could. And the best part is that with enough skill, you can use the bat form as a chase tool since you completely ignore all vaults, meaning that you can bypass a vault, transform back to vampire form while body blocking it, and now you have an easy down. Dracula completely counters hold W tactics, making it very hard for survivors to chain loops, and with the teleport and certain add-ons, you can even block the windows and make survivors hindered by 15% for 5 seconds, which is better than Clown or Freddy's entire powers, and it's just one add-on. Dracula's bat form is fantastic, and many players are sleeping on the shapeshift cooldown reduction buff. If you play Dracula in a fair way, I can see how people can claim that he is not as strong, but if you play Dracula to his maximum potential in a disgusting way, downing survivors extremely fast without missing flame pillars, proxy camping hook survivors, or returning to hooks in order to prevent resets, slugging survivors around, and constantly pressuring others, Dracula has good tools on his arsenal that allow him to give a hard match to the best survivors. Dracula has decent anti-loop, better than the majority of characters. Dracula has absurdly good map mobility that is not dependent on any map, and at worst, he also has tracking. So if you lose, it's simply because it's a skill issue, or the survivors were so strong that you wouldn't win without an S tier character. Albert Wesker is one of the biggest successes Behavior has ever had when creating a license, and there is a reason why he has one of the highest pick rates out of all killers. He is strong, easy to play for casuals, and with a high skill ceiling for the masters. Wesker's dash power is a fantastic tool in order to both travel around the map when you know when there are survivors to pressure, and also a tool in order to get a hit during a chase. His anti-loop is very effective in making a lot of strong looping structures unsafe for survivors, and is also a counter to survivors simply holding W, which forces them to chain loops if they want to stay alive. But not only is this an already solid anti-loop power, it is also a tool to infect survivors, which forces them to interact with the sprays, so it's a type of slowdown. Unlike with Nemesis, where you can honestly just ignore it, with Wesker, the Ouroboros is significantly more dangerous as it makes survivors slower and also instantly grabs survivors even if they are healthy, so your lethality is also at the same time a passive slowdown to survivors that also works as a tracking tool once they decide to spray themselves. The only change Wesker got from my last video is a nerf to his tunnel capabilities, as now survivors that are unhooked will start with their infection rate reset to 0. So while this tunneling is worse than before, he still has the power to annoy survivors that unhook on his face, as he can redirect survivors with the dash attack in order to defend the hook and also do collateral damage to the unhooked survivors, forcing them to mend, or helping you tunnel them out if you want, since this will bypass off the record. Wesker also has access to the biggest radius out of all killers in the roster, which allows him to synergize with terror radius perks and also catch survivors off guard if you use undetectable perks. Either way, Wesker has a lot of flexibility, which is one of the reasons for his massive popularity. I finally get to talk about the Unknown, my favorite newest character in the game, and there is a lot that I want to talk about. Unknown is one of the best designed killers Behavior has ever released, and it's also the strongest ranged character out of all ranged characters. This is because this killer has everything a good killer needs in order to work well: lethality, map mobility, and a way to passively slow down the match. The Unknown's projectile attack is kinda like a grenade launcher, a speed that you have to hit survivors twice in order to injure them. The first explosion will cause survivors the weakened status effect, and any projectiles that explode on weakened survivors will injure them. Unlike the other ranged killers, Unknown is also the only one able to hit various survivors with just one projectile, which can be very good to prevent resets. and once a survivor is weakened, they have to keep looking at you in order to remove the status. This sometimes will force survivors to go out of their way in order to interact with you, making them lose their time if they want to feel safe. Another fact of the projectile is that, since it's an explosion, Unknown can use this in order to hit survivors through walls, which is something a lot of survivors do not expect at all. This can be used to its maximum potential when you hit survivors that are one floor above, so unlike with other ranged killers, Unknown is the only one that can use walls and obstacles to its advantage and is not hindered in indoor maps. And on top of that, unlike with other ranged killers, the Unknown also has another ace up its sleeve, and that's the illusions. By weakening survivors, you're able to place illusions around the map. This is by far the strongest and fastest teleportability out of all of them, and this can be used in order to catch survivors off guard, pressure survivors from afar, and also use this during a chase in order to cut survivors off and prevent them from looping. Survivors will also want to remove the illusions since they are very dangerous to keep in the match, and if you catch a survivor doing that, you can punish them severely. All in all, the Unknown is just very strong, very flexible, and one of my favorites to play with. In a meta where the strongest perks survivors have are Decisive Strike, Off the Record, Resurgence, or Reassurance, a killer that completely bypasses that will always be considered high tier. Pyramid Head is potentially the killer with the strongest chase presence out of all of them. His punishment of the damned attack can hit survivors that are animation locked, can penetrate walls making the majority of loops not safe anymore against him, and even if you don't use the attack, him sticking the sword on the ground is intimidating enough that survivors will try to dodge it, zoning them and getting free hits in a lot of situations. And then we have the Tormented status effect, which is what survivors get anytime they walk over the trails you leave behind. Being tormented is so dangerous for survivors that some of them will actually take a hit and get downed only to not get the Tormented status effect, which you can use to your advantage. Just like with Dracula, Pyramid Head can confirm a trade on any unhook situation as his attack will penetrate through survivors, so this can be used as an advantage in endgame situations. And let's talk about his cages, because that's what elevates Pyramid Head from a strong killer to a top tier one. Once you cage a survivor, they will be teleported to the furthest place away from you, but if you are smart, you will know where they will be. What makes cages so strong is that there is no protection whatsoever from them, no hook perks work, and no anti-tunnel perks work either, so you can literally camp the cage with the attack, wait until a survivor is uncaged, and hit both the rescuee as well as downing the survivor that was just uncaged. And even if you don't use the cages, and instead you decide to save the torment for the end, the fact that Pyramid Head can just kill a survivor that is tormented on last hook is also really strong, since you can completely ignore survivors trying to flashlight save or pallet save, and it's also very fast, allowing Pyramid Head to not lose any time whatsoever on the hooking process. It's true that if you take advantages of cages, you don't get value of hooking perks like Pain Resonance or Pop Goes the Whistle, but he compensates it with aura reading perks like Zanshin Tactics or I'm All Ears, as you can make Pyramid Head down survivors so fast that you basically do not require gen regression perks with the amount of pressure you put survivors in. Singularity got a very big buff since the last ranking video, and that was in my opinion enough to make Singularity's amazing design stand on the A tier as he deserved. A good Singularity will never let survivors have a moment to rest, because he can pressure the entire map at almost all times and down pallets so fast that even Nemesis has envy. Singularity's biopods allow him to slipstream survivors no matter where, and also give him information on their location at all times. Basically, it doesn't matter where you are, you can appear anywhere. This pressure forces survivors to interact with the EMPs in order to remove the slipstream and also stop the biopods from working, so it's a way to slow down the match a bit. Singularity was hard to use before, but now that he has built-in auto-aim, and now that he has access to 2 add-on slots, now that family photo is not mandatory, it is significantly easier to catch survivors doing a chase and catch up to them after a hit even from far away, especially when you pair Rapid Brutality with him. Singularity just like the Huntress is a danger no matter the distance the survivors have from you, so he is one of the best counters to the hold W tactic. It's true that good survivors can try and play in an altruistic way against you, picking EMPs in order to body block survivors or remove their teammates' slipstream. But if the survivors are playing in a competitive way, why can't you? That's why the Singularity is also one of the kings of snowballs, allowing him to win a match the moment you start pressuring survivors and slugging them to add on to pressure. When you play him well, it doesn't matter if survivors use EMPs because you can just replace the biopods and slipstream them again. The only bad thing about Singularity is how indoor maps completely mess him up. There are still collision problems, and those maps are fundamentally bad for a power that is focused on line of sight. If he had the consistency of having each map be perfect for him, like is the case with the Azeroth realm, then Singularity could easily be S tier in terms of pressure. Survivors, you should be grateful that nobody plays the twins, because they are absolutely busted currently in DBD. In fact, twins are currently the killers with the highest kill rate, replacing the position of Skull Merchant, yet it seems like nobody will complain because the twins are rarer than a mentally sane DBD player. I find it crazy how barely anyone complains about the fact that Victor, a little gremlin, is the deadliest creature in the entity's realm, because as long as you play well, there is no counterplay for survivors. Victor is too fast for survivors to avoid and escape from, and he can just jump through vaults. The same happens with pallets. If you know how to do it, Victor will hit survivors and get a pallet out of the way. Being injured against the twins is one of the most dangerous things you can do, because just by one mistake, you can snowball the entire match into a win, which is why Charlotte is known as the Queen of 4-man slugging. The amount of games I won just because of one mistake is way too much to count, and it's the biggest reason why I know that players who rank twins low have no idea what they're talking about. The only way to win against a twins player is to play in the complete opposite way as usual, because survivors have to be together in order to prevent Victor from snowballing hard. And there is only one reason as to why twins are not S tier, and that's called We Are Gonna Live Forever, Boon Exponential, and Unbreakable. Death Heart is also the only thing a survivor can do against Victor, so the existence of these perks keep twins outside of the killer podium, as no other characters gets messed up so hard as the twins do against survivors bringing anti-slug perks. And let's be fair, I cannot talk about the twins without mentioning the bugs. When you play twins, you're expected to find at least one bug each time. Still, if you ignore the bugs, unlike with the Knight, you will find a very strong killer under all that trash. As one of the #1 artist glazers in the community, I finally have to be objective and see the truth of this character. Now, don't get me wrong, I still firmly believe that Artist is one of the strongest killers in Dead by Daylight, and hypothetically speaking, she is S tier material. The Artist can punish and injure survivors all over the map, making her the only killer that is able to pressure the entire map without having a single mobility power on her kit. This is thanks to her snipes, which is one of the most fun playstyles Artist players can do. Even if you miss, you're still able to track the position of survivors anytime survivors are near your crow shots. And let's not mention the fact that if you catch a survivor in the basement, you can guarantee a trade by placing a crow on the stairs. The Artist can also harass various survivors during a chase, making her an interesting combination of a killer strong in the chase as well as the macro gameplay, so survivors are never safe. However, and this is something that I have to mention now, the Artist has various flaws that after more careful consideration drops her down some tiers. The first issue is the fact that maps with elevations make her significantly weaker, and this can be felt hard against survivors that know this and abuse it on maps like the Swamp, RPD, the Game, or Midwich. You cannot harass generators in these maps as easily as in others. The second issue is lockers. Because once survivors know that you can enter a locker to remove the crows instantly, she loses all the pressure she had as well as the capability to snipe survivors from afar. It's way too easy to counter, gives a sense of security for survivors that are not S tier, and honestly, it should be removed from the game. The third issue, which is rare but is still important to mention, is that survivors can play in an altruistic way and break the crows with their body in order to help their teammate. This is rare and high level, but whenever it happens, it is very noticeable. And finally, the artist add-ons are simply underwhelming. There is no add-on that makes her borderline overpowered or an add-on that changes the way she's played except for the iridescent Garden of Rot. The best add-ons are the ones that allow her to snipe survivors, as well as Matthias' hands, which transfer the crows to anyone close nearby, which compared to other S-tier killers is not as good. Next up, with the title of the most underrated killer in the game, we have the Plague, a character that I am shocked barely any survivor complains about outside of players with emetophobia. You know how many flashlight players hate the perk Lightborn because it completely invalidates a mechanic in the game? Well, with the Plague, you literally invalidate medkits, which are the strongest items survivors have. It also invalidates every single healing perk in the game, which includes Resurgence, which is super popular after Oddsdarva made the survivor perk tier list. You know how survivors also complained about Skull Merchant getting free injuries just by plopping her drones. Plague literally can't get free injuries from survivors doing their objective. After Legion, the Plague has the easiest first hit out of all killers, making her combine very well with perks like Thanatophobia or Blood Echo. And the funniest part is that unlike with modern killers, where the built-in counter Plague makes the killers weaker like the Xenomorph's turrets or Vecna's treasure chests, the Fountains actually make the Plague stronger, giving her access to arguably the strongest projectile attack out of all range killers. And just like the other A-tier killers, the Plague with this power can end the match in just one use, which is the reason why so many survivors completely ignore the Fountains and instead decide to stay infected. So, at the worst, you are a killer that can insta-down survivors and also track them down thanks to the coughs they make. At the best, you are a killer that can end the match in just one use of their power. The Plague is going to get changes in the future, and something tells me that they will give her the Singularity treatment and actually buff her simply because nobody plays her. So hopefully my words do not age like the Plague's infection did. Now, we talked a lot about killers that can snowball the match and get a win, like the Plague, the Singularity or the Twins, but now it's the time to talk about the best snowball killer in the entire game, and that is the Oni, the perfect way to make a killer that gets stronger the longer the match progresses. So it's a completely better version of Michael Myers. You start the game as a literal M1 killer, you have no power whatsoever, and you have to play by the rules. Good survivors will play in the safest way possible because they know what happens once someone gets hit. And this is, in my opinion, the only thing keeping Oni outside of the top 3. But the moment you get a hit, that's when the game turns over for survivors, because the Oni becomes temporarily a top 3 killer. He's now able to move across the map at incredible speeds and gets access to an instant down power that can also break pallets with it. From now on, the Oni will constantly get Blood Fury throughout the match because survivors will have to heal in order to prevent you from getting your power, which still gives him access to his power back. A good Oni can constantly keep Blood Fury up, which is equal to keeping the pressure of survivors up. On top of that, the Oni also has some insane add-ons that make his Blood Fury even stronger, like increasing his Demon Dash speed, making survivors drop more orbs, or allowing Oni to start the dash faster. This makes the Oni one of the scariest killers survivors have to play against, and also one of the best designed, because the Oni received no changes whatsoever since his introduction to the game, proving that he was perfectly designed from the start. Chucky is a very curious case for me, because there is a version of this killer that I never ranked, which is the Scamper version. That Chucky was a top 5 killer in my opinion, arguably stronger than the top tier killers because he was extremely easy to use with the Scamper. Now, he is still a top 5 killer in the game, almost going toe to toe with Spirit, despite the fact that various players claimed that he would be dead. Chucky got a side grade with his power, where he traded the Scamper ability to a very short slice and dice cooldown, giving Chucky some insane lethality that is basically considered by many survivors as something you simply cannot counter. A good Chucky will make you go down eventually no matter what, because Slice and Dice is simply too strong. On top of that, even without the Slice and Dice, Chucky players play loops in a completely different way compared to other characters, and this is thanks to his low stature, which can confuse a lot of survivors during a chase, and also his third-person camera, which allows him to do something that the community knows as chuck spots, which are especially strong against impatient survivors that don't know how to hold their own check spots. And even if I don't consider Chucky a stealth killer because he laughs anytime he gets undetectable, and survivors also know you are in hidey-ho mode because of the illusory footsteps that appear all around them, I still think thanks to Chucky's size, it is possible to catch survivors off guard. I still think that his slow speed keeps him out of the S tier club, because truth be told, he has no map mobility power, and he's also not that good in terms of slugging and snowballing, as instead, his way of winning is absolutely dominating chases to the point survivors cannot reset in time. But Chucky has a ticket that allows him to visit the S tier category, and that ticket it's called Rat Poison. This add-on is so absurdly broken that it shocks me that something like this was designed in 2023. It's better than any overreading perk, it completely removes any counterplay survivors have, it can be used to find survivors by traversing the map, it's way too good, to the point various Chucky mains do not use it because they know how busted it is. But now let's talk about what everyone knows as the S tier killer ranking. These killers are capable of winning against the top caliber of survivors and are viable in a competitive setting. And starting out with the first S tier killer, we have the Spirit, a nightmare for accessibility as all her counterplay is based on sound. The Spirit has a lot of similarities with Chucky, as they are both 110% killers that depend entirely on their lethality in order to win the match, but in my opinion, Spirit's phasing is stronger than Slice and Dice. While not recommended, the Spirit is capable of using her power as a mobility tool, as her phasing is easier to control, has more duration, and can even be stronger with speed add-ons. So unlike Chucky, who needs to be relatively close to a survivor in order to use his power, the Spirit can start it from further away, so her presence is more intimidating. Another thing that puts her above Chucky is the fact that her power attack counts as a basic attack, giving her synergy with perks like Save the Best for Last, Rapid Brutality, Sloppy Butcher, and every single exposed perk like Know It or Friends Till the End. She is the only killer with such a strong lethal power that still counts as a basic attack, unlike the Nurse and the Blight. And while she doesn't have a single add-on that is on the level of Rat Poison, she still has a wide selection of broken add-ons like her recovery speed add-ons, the Cherry Blossom which allows her to track survivors with no mistake, and Mother-Daughter Ring which makes her speed so fast there is basically no counterplay. So combine busted add-ons with the possibility of running busted perks and you have a fantastic killer. Next up, with the bronze medal, and after a lot of consideration, I have to put the Blight as the third best killer in the game. The Blight has the perfect combo of what a killer needs in order to be top tier, an insane chase power and insane map mobility. Blight's rushes combine both into one, allowing him to pressure survivors from the start of the match, downing them fast with rushes and go pressure generators from afar, and the moment survivors unhook your victim, you can also just rush back like 99% of Blight players do. Unlike the vast majority of killers in the game, the Blight is also arguably the killer that gets the most value out of his add-ons, and this is because unlike with other killers where add-ons only get value a limited time, with Blight you get value every single time you use your power, and you use your power constantly. So with just one add-on, you boost both his lethality as well as the map mobility. This is the reason why during so many years, the Blight's add-ons were considered as some of the most busted in the entire game. Since my last ranking video, where he was the second best, the Blight did get nerfs that hinder his best state, as Alchemist Ring is now gone, Blighted Tag was reworked, and the Hug Tech is deep under the water, which arguably are quite big hits to his power. But even with such considerable nerfs that would be capable of killing other killers, the Blight is so fundamentally strong that I simply do not see him being ever out of the S tier category. On top of all of that, the Blight can also break pallets fast thanks to his rush, creating dead zones that make his already lethal power even stronger, as well as break important walls in maps where this is necessary, like Dead Dog Saloon. It's true that his mobility is hindered on indoor maps and some indoor sections of certain buildings, but by removing the pallets and knowing how to play Blight and when to use his power, you can still compensate that weakness. I can't believe that I am seeing Hillbilly as an S-tier killer. It truly feels like we went back to 2016. The last time I made my ranking, Hillbilly was a B-tier killer at best, but now, thanks to Overdrive, Hillbilly is back at dominating the matches just like we remember. The Hillbilly's power is simple and effective, and just like Blight, he combines both map mobility along with lethality in just one kit. Again, any add-ons that boost his power boost his map mobility and lethality. Unlike Blight, Hillbilly is significantly more focused on lethality, as his chainsaw is an insta-down power, and in my personal opinion, this lethality put him an edge above the Blight. Hillbilly can get lucky and get a chainsaw snipe at the start of the match, or even a snipe during the match, especially if you build him in an undetectable focused build. The chainsaw's lethality makes it impossible for survivors to play in an altruistic way, body blocking you, as they will end up downed, and this can be used in order to slug the survivors and snowball the match into absolute domination. Not to mention the fact that if Hillbilly wants a survivor death, he can just proxy camp the hook in order to guarantee a trade or sacrifice, and completely camp in the endgame with nothing survivors can do. And then, with Overdrive, Hillbilly gets a state where he becomes even better, faster, and more lethal. In this state, it's very hard to counter Hillbilly, as the speed at which you go is hard to react to, and it makes various loops that are unsafe into complete death sentences for survivors that try to loop you. I would argue that Hillbilly with Overdrive is the most lethal killer in the game. However, Hillbilly, just like Blight, has a huge issue that doesn't allow him to be the best killer of the game, and that is walls. Hillbilly suffers a lot on indoor maps like Larry's, The Game, or RPD, but with enough skill, you can make him work on any map since his collision is now better, and even after the nerfs done to his power, I still think Hillbilly is in a fantastic state, and the Lopper chains are still an incredible add-on. The nurse is still the queen of Dead by Daylight as the strongest killer since her release, so strong that I started a conspiracy theory where I claim the devs keep her strong so nobody can ever say the game is pay to win, and so no licensed killer will ever be better than her. The nurse plays DBD in a completely different way. She can completely bypass walls, pallets, walls, basically ignoring the only counterplay survivors have to killers. She is in fact the only killer where using pallets is a mistake, and instead survivors have to play by keeping distance and using obstacles in order to counter her and hide from her. I still keep the mentality that unlike with the rest of killer powers, where you can miss because the survivors dodge your attacks or make you miss, if you miss the blinks with the nurse, it is totally a skill issue by your part. Despite her not being able to use exposed perks or basic attack perks, she is by far the best user of aura reading perks, as she can teleport on top of survivors without them expecting a blink, completely removing any guessing game you might have had against great survivors. Additionally, unlike the other S-tier killers like Hillbilly or Blight, which get hurt on certain maps, the nurse literally doesn't care. Since she can bypass walls, you can just teleport to different floors with the press of a button as long as there are no map borders. The nurse is fundamentally overpowered, her power design is busted, and this video is already too long, so have a good day.